Hello and welcome to Sunday Politics. We're entering a critical period for Stormont finances and our public services. This week we'll see the detail of how little there is to spread around the departments and discover the consequences of that. Could we see services being cut? I'll be speaking to the SDLP Chair and the DUP Vice Chair of the Finance Committee and hearing from the think tank looking under the bonnet of Stormont and not liking what it sees. Plus, what will be the impact of the First Minister's message to the Prime Minister?
So I said publicly before I came here that I would put directly to the Prime Minister the anger that's out there.
And joining me with his analysis of what we're discussing, the Irish News political correspondent, John Manley. Have we reached the point where Stormont's political decision-making is now coming up against the reality of the lack of money available to pay for those decisions? Well, there have been two big calls to deal with health workers' pay and the PSNI data breach compensation within next year's budget. We are now aware of the extent to which the Education Minister wants to overspend in this year too. Such are the pressures he's facing. It's part of what many observers are saying is the inevitable consequence of the decisions Stormont has needed to face up to for many years, but hasn't in any meaningful way actually taken. It's a big couple of weeks ahead for executive ministers with not only this, but also a multi-year budget to agree. I'm joined now by the Chair and Vice Chair of Stormont's Finance Committee, Matthew O'Toole from the SDLP and Diane Forsyth from the DUP. Welcome to both of you. Diane Forsyth, first of all, on Tuesday we'll see the process called the monitoring round taking place. That's where unspent money available to Stormont between now and the end of next March is spread around between the departments. In fact, it's all about the extent of overspending that's going on. That's what the focus is on. Our political correspondent, Jane McCormack, has a report on our digital news service this morning outlining how the Education Minister, Paul Givan, told the Finance Minister, John O'Dowd, about a forecast overspend of almost £290 million in his department. What do you make of that latest twist in this story?
Well, Mark, I think it's not a latest twist. We in the Finance Committee see these reports coming through from departments on their outturn every single month. The Finance Minister has had sight of this, as well as all the departments' returns every single month. So this is it coming to fruition as the monitoring rounds come to the fore. So we'll see how much other departments are given back to see what can be reallocated. But it's the very real pressures that we're under, given that on the executive restoration package, we've only just seen our funding uplifted to almost our level of need, but not quite here in Northern Ireland. We've had years off underfunding and we're trying to get back on top of it. So it's going to be really critical these weeks and months ahead. But as I say, in the Finance Committee, we see this coming through every single month. The pressures are real, they are highlighted, and there's going to be some difficult decisions ahead. Yeah,
it is the latest twist in that it is the first time the public will have heard the detail of this potential overspend of £288 million and the first time they'll have seen the exchange of letters between the two ministers. And neither of them pulls any punches, it has to be said.
Yeah, well, I just saw that this morning coming through, and obviously every minister is fighting to deliver the best they can within their own department. With education, a lot of the pressures are statutory based. A high percentage of the education budget is salaries, it's teacher salaries, it's the staff salaries, and a lot of statutory obligations where there's a requirement to deliver certain aspects of education. So a lot of that is immovable pressures, and it has been highlighted through the year. So it's important to see that compared to a lot of other departments, there's not that much flexibility. I've put in a series of questions across departments to ask how much discretionary spend that they have to move within other departments. And I think it's important that when the Finance Minister is sitting centrally, he takes a view on that.
But we've seen an upping of the ante, I think, as well, in some of what Paul Givan had to say when he said to the Finance Minister effectively, there's no way I could sign off on a multi-year budget under these circumstances. And there's no way that he can meet the demands that he needs to within his department. Those are quite serious. The implications of that shouldn't be underplayed.
No, definitely not. And I think what we also need to realise the lack of movement over the past year and a half since Stormont has been restored, as to see any sort of transformation in our public services. There hasn't been any grasp of the overspending in terms of £3 billion a year that is spent in public service and supplies without a procurement strategy. £3 billion overspent in capital projects. These are things through the Public Accounts Committee we brought to the fore. The review of arm's length bodies. We've got, I think, about 180 Quangos arm's length bodies within departments with with no proactive decisions being made as to how to realise any efficiencies. We really need to see those things getting to grip of.
Yeah, OK. And of course, you're here speaking today as Vice Chair of the committee, but you're also a DUP MLA, which is the second biggest party at Stormont. Let me bring in Matthew O'Toole now, who chairs the Finance Committee. I mean, the exchange of letters is fascinating, and I would certainly urge viewers today to go onto the website and read Jane McCormack's report, because it is very revealing. And effectively, each minister says to the other, you should have foreseen these circumstances and acted accordingly.
Yes, in one sense, it's important to be fair, which is to say that ministers, when they create budgets, the job, and it happens in all governments, is that departmental ministers, spending ministers as they're called, negotiate with the finance department. That happens in London, Dublin, Edinburgh, wherever. The fact that this is leaked is not a good sign politically, obviously, but it's also the case that how these things are dealt with is that they're supposed to be an agreed set of priorities that the executive works to, the programme for government. Then that is fulfilled via a multi-year budget. The fact that we look like we're not going to get a multi-year budget agreed anytime soon is deeply worrying, and frankly it goes back to the dysfunction at the heart of the executive.
So the plan for that multi-year budget, sorry to cut across you, is the week after next. So we've got the monitoring round this week, then I think notionally penciled in was the multi-year budget conversation the following week. Do you think now, given this latest twist and given the general situation as far as funding is concerned within the executive, we are unlikely to see a multi-year budget agreed this side of Christmas?
Well, it certainly looks unlikely at the minute, and what we've heard is that the Finance Minister says he's going to issue a draft multi-year budget in the hope that his colleagues agree it. But the challenge is, well, first of all, they got the spending review from the UK government in June. We all would like more money. We all agree that the UK government, initially wasn't funding this place it need, and we agree that we want more. My party has called consistently for greater responsibility, taking more revenue raising and more fiscal devolution here. But the challenge is they got those totals way back in June. That was 6 months ago. They knew to plan for these things. They knew what the headroom was going to be. They knew the decisions and the choices they were going to have to make. All of this could have and should have been sorted out much earlier in the process, getting to the mouth of Christmas and doing a monitoring round, which is essentially just a reallocation of funds in the same financial year, and then not being able to agree a multi-year budget when, by the way, it was the big thing that was promised, and John O'Dowd and other ministers consistently said they wanted to agree a multi-year budget before the end of the year. It simply isn't good enough. Yes, these are difficult decisions, but that's what they're paid and elected to take.
OK. There are funding pressures, I think it's fair to say, right across the executive departments, some more than others. The question is as to whether or not the undue pressure, or the extra pressure we seem to be seeing this year, is a culmination of pay parity settlements. Has the time come for a serious conversation to take place about breaking pay parity?
I don't think so, because I think pay parity has to be a very critical thing for public sector workers, to the extent
across the board.
Well, certainly they were promised pay parity, and in relation specifically to health, I want to talk about health first of all, because we know the state of the health service and we know the promises that were made. But yes, when it comes to pay parity, I think there's a question here about trust in our politicians. And when I say our politicians, I mean the big parties and those who have power in the executive at the minute. Yes, trust in all of us as well. If public sector workers were promised parity consistently, they have an expectation that should be delivered. How that is dealt with is that you set multi-year budgets and you explain to the public the choices you're making. If that means you have to take decisions to raise revenue in certain ways, you have to be honest with people. My consistent question, not just as finance chair, but as leader of the opposition, is to the bigger parties and to the finance minister: what decisions are you making in order to deliver outcomes for the public?
Let me just ask that question to Diane Forsyth before we move the conversation on. Are there any circumstances where a conversation could take place about breaking pay parity?
We're really supportive of pay parity, and as Matthew said, looking straight into the health service where they were promised it, especially those domiciliary care workers, and as we look to that, needs to be the priority.
But that commitment has consequences.
Absolutely, and it is the responsibility of us to work together to try to find that money, to find those efficiencies. Like the Department of Health gets over half.
But that's not happening.
Well, there needs to be proactive steps to do it. There are a range of measures. We need to see the efficiencies being strove for within the Department of Health. You know, we have consequential problems across a number of different trusts. There are issues. Like recently, I had a question in about there's £40 million a year that is going towards funding university fees for medical courses, but no requirement that anybody ever then works in the Northern Ireland Health Service. There are a lot of big spends that are being made without guaranteed returns to the Northern Ireland Health Service. There are a lot of really serious issues that we need to get rid of.
OK, let's just pause the conversation with both of you. Thank you for now, because listening to that, the director of the pivotal think tank, Anne Watt, and John Manley from the Irish News. Welcome to both of you. Anne, first of all, just to boil this down, there is a huge contradiction at the heart of this debate. Public finances appear to be overstretched, and at the same time, the delivery of public services is falling far short of people's needs.
Yeah, both of those things are really clear if we look at the last few years of public services and budgets here. The other thing that is a recurring feature is that we have been saved, I suppose, or rescued by a big injection of funding from the UK government for each of the last 3 years, and there's no prospect of that happening at the minute. So we have that real tension, I suppose, of the public not getting what they want from public services, but a constant budget crisis. And really, this is the opportunity that a multi-year budget presents to start to address some of the fundamental problems that we have in how we're setting budgets and how we're managing public services.
Yeah, has there been an overdependence in the past in the in-year monitoring rounds? Because in his letter to the Finance Minister, the Education Minister, Paul Givan, says, look, we've always managed to deal with some of these shortfalls during the year through those monitoring rounds. O'Dowd is very, very clear that he had made it clear that that wouldn't necessarily be the case this year.
Yeah, I think what we need to do is be setting realistic budgets at the start of the year. We get into an annual budget crisis almost always related to pay. Pay is an obvious cost. It's 60% of the spend of the executive as a whole. So you need to factor in your pay increases and your other cost increases at the start of the year. Expecting to come back to that is unrealistic and is always going to lead to problems.
OK, so what happens if there is no multi-year budget agreement at the end of this year or early next year? What are the consequences of that failure to agree by executive ministers?
Yeah, I think the first thing that might happen is that it's not a multi-year budget, it's a single-year budget. And particularly with the election coming up in 2027, that might be what happens. And that would be
really... everybody tells us that part of the reason we're in the trouble we're in is because we haven't had a multi-year budget, and single-year budgets don't work. So when you can't agree a multi-year budget and you have that opportunity, and that has been your goal, you go back to the single-year budget.
Completely. I mean, and there's an even worse option, I think, which is that they really struggle to agree a budget at all. And I would say about that, you know, if you're in government, one of the most fundamental things you have to do is you have to agree a budget, and you have to, in our mandatory coalition, work together to do that.
So here is the question then. Paul Givan, and again, those letters are fascinating, and I know you've read them this morning. I mean, do you have any sympathy with the position Paul Givan finds himself in, where there is a teachers' pay settlement, which is effectively, I mean, imposed on him, but he has very little agency in that, if any at all. So he's told, you've got to account for that within your budget, and it's a very significant amount of money. How is he supposed to accommodate that in a single annual budget without facing the kind of crisis he's clearly facing?
Yeah, this is obviously really difficult. There's no easy answer here. Pay pressures are huge, particularly in the Department of Health and Department of Education's budget, and both those departments have made efforts to reduce their spending in year, and you can see that, I think, in the actions they've taken, including the Department of Education a few weeks ago. So it is very, very difficult. But again, I go back to what I said before. The executive as a whole should be agreeing realistic budgets at the start of the year and not relying on somehow money coming from somewhere mid-year. Perhaps the fact that the UK government has provided several hundred million every year extra in the middle of the year for different reasons in the budget or in the restoration package, perhaps we got used to that and we're thinking, you know, something will come up. And actually this year, I don't think anything is going to come up, as the First and Deputy First Minister found in Wales when they asked the Prime Minister about more funding. The UK government set the 3-year settlement in the spending review back in June. They've done that huge piece of work. They've had all the negotiations about the change to the Barnett formula. So I think the UK government will see this as pinned down and agreed. OK,
let me bring John Manley in at this point. Politically speaking, that's what you're interested in above everything else. How do you think this plays out?
Well, it's a very bleak and dispiriting picture that's being painted, and Anne and Diane and Matthew have alluded to the remedies for a very bleak diagnosis, but there's seemingly there's no intention of the executive to address these issues in a very short time, and even the talk of a multi-year budget, what's happening in this exchange of letters, suggests that even that process will now be disrupted and won't be agreed in time, and in this time is short. Every month we move closer to an election, and the likelihood of any measures that will address this situation becomes less likely.
Yeah, when you think about some of the things that could be done here in terms of transformation, we have not seen significant transformation delivered. We are wedded to pay parity at this stage, but I'll get your thoughts on that in just a moment or two. Nobody seems to want to grasp the nettle of revenue raising in any serious, meaningful way. And efficiencies, well, except that you're in opposition. Matthew O'Toole says we do, but you're in opposition. There's your number one problem as far as that's concerned. Then efficiencies, you're tinkering in the margins.
Not necessarily. If there was a genuine effort to address efficiencies, we might see some.
Well, that's
money.
A big if. That's my point.
Yes, but there's been no indication that that's happening. There's a necessity, I think, really, to, if there is a process that brings about a multi-year budget, to make some hard choices and spell it out to the public what needs to be done. But the prospects of that are, unlikely.
Diane.
Yeah, thanks, Mark. I think that it's time that people bring different suggestions to the table, and we've seen that through Gordon Lyons. He's brought forward suggestions to use more FTC through the delivery of Department of Communities and Housing. He's looking for increased borrowing powers for the housing executive to be able to progress more building of homes, and he's also put in a case at the minute with the Treasury, which he hasn't got full support for from executive colleagues, but where we're seeing over £3 million fraud and error being detected here through the benefits system, where we clamp down on that. Gordon has a case in that if our Department of Community staff are able to deliver returns on that can come back into our Northern Ireland block. So there are examples where through his department and the work of it, he's made proposals, but I think that everyone needs to be making firm proposals through every channel that they can.
Yeah, but I mean, this requires commitment on the part of every party involved in the executive. And domestic rates, for example, there's a paper in front of the executive, and your party seems to be blocking that. Certainly, that's the charge of the finance minister. We had a senior health official working in finance, talking to a committee up at Stormont last week saying, look, we tried to deal with the issue of transformation, but we hit some obstacles and we weren't able to make the progress that we hoped we would be able to make. Every way you turn, there seems to be something blocking progress.
I think just at that higher level, we need a commitment to transformation. We see this as we work in this siloed mentality that we do.
But you can't get a higher level than being the second biggest party in the executive and having the position of Deputy First Minister. That is your party. You are at the highest level, but you're still not delivering the kind of progress you say people at the highest level need to deliver.
Well, I mean at the highest level of all of our government structures here. It needs to feed right the way down. And I think that we are seeing some progress in some areas, that we see it through the department or through the Public Accounts Committee, whenever we're making recommendations on issues like reducing adult reoffending. It's actually hitting right across all the different departments. So whenever the tone is set from the top with political representatives, there needs to be a complete shift in the culture. And as I say, how we transform our public services, how they're delivered, how everyone is working together.
I'm curious to who needs to deliver that. Who's pulling up short at the minute? I mean, presume you're not thinking that the DUP ministers are pulling up short, but you can't be seriously suggesting that everybody else is pulling up short, but your colleagues are performing brilliantly, are you?
No, I'm saying that everyone needs to get a very realistic grip of what we need to work together to do here.
We're looking into those for years. I mean, do we not have a realistic grip on the challenge? If we're only working this out now, heaven help us.
Well, I don't think we're only working it out now. I think that with this monitoring round, as we move forward to the multi-year budget, we have a good opportunity to tackle a lot of these issues, to take a grasp of the fraud and error in the system, to provide transformation, to deliver efficiencies, things that we have really needed to be doing up to this point. We need to look into that and deliver it. And we've got our vulnerable community sector sitting at a cliff edge right now with the local growth fund coming forward, and if we aren't able to deliver the multi-year budget, their services will suffer here too.
Okay, well, let me ask the Stormont's official leader of the opposition, Matthew O'Toole, sitting alongside you, a colleague in the Finance Committee, what he makes of what you've just said. What do you make of a senior representative of the DUP saying people at the highest level need to get a grip?
Well, what Diane says is right in many cases, in the sense that people do need to get a grip, and there are specific issues which need to be faced, but that does come back to the challenge that her party and Sinn Féin in particular need to grasp, which is a multi-year budget.
And her colleague, Paul Given, said a couple of weeks ago on Radio Ulster, I'm not in partnership with Sinn Féin in government.
Well, those are words he's used. I'm not sure they're particularly advisable. I don't think they sent the right message. Ultimately, people out there want a government to deliver better public services and improve their lives. A lot of the budgetary stuff, it's very important to us, and and we scrutinise it in detail. I get very geeky about it, and it's very important stuff. However, for the public out there, they just want to know what the plan is, how you're going to rescue the health service, invest in water infrastructure so you can build social homes, ensure there are more PSNI on the street, make sure that public sector workers get decent pay. Those are simple questions that people have been promised answers to. The way to answer them is through a multi-year budget. There will be difficult decisions because there are difficult decisions in all jurisdictions. And if these parties cannot or will not make them, it will only ask the question about fundamental reform of how Stormont works, because we can't go on like this. Having nearly 2 years into the place being restored and they can't even agree a multi-year budget 6 months after they got a spending review from the UK government, and unfortunately people who are watching and people who aren't watching will just be concluding that they don't want to make it work.
What do you make of that? What you've just heard?
I think we have to take the opportunity in a multi-year budget, and it's going to be very, very tough. The numbers are concerning, I would say even alarming, if you look at how much money is coming through in the next few years. So the difficult decisions are just going to pile up, but we must transform public services. Public services are not affordable as they're currently configured within the budget that we have, and they're also not delivering for the public. So transformation. So
there's a contradiction. There is a fundamental contradiction there, where we could find ourselves in a situation of revenue raising moving forward, where people are being asked to pay more for reduced public services.
Yes, I think there's a huge crisis coming up in the finances. I think it's been bad in recent years. What we're heading into with the numbers that are there is even worse. And so I think we have to take a fundamental look at everything, about all the spending right across every public service, looking at what's in the baseline, not just looking at the additions, looking at efficiencies, and really importantly, looking at transformation. But the other things I would say have to be on the table to be discussed is, what are we doing about raising revenue locally? And can we afford pay parity?
Well, and that's the thing I want to ask you about. What does that actually mean? Because you can just imagine now people watching this programme, politicians and perhaps union representatives, choking on their Sunday morning coffee when you say we need to have a serious conversation about whether or not we can afford pay parity. What does that conversation need to look like?
When I look at the numbers for the budget that's coming up next year and the following 2 years, next year it's basically not much more than flat cash, and that'll be worse if there's an overspend taken out of it. I don't see how you can pay 3.5% pay lift right across the board if you haven't got any increase in your budget whatsoever. The numbers just don't add up. If you do want to maintain pay parity, and of course that's a political choice that politicians may want to do, but if you do want to maintain pay parity, that means reducing spending elsewhere or raising revenue elsewhere.
OK. Or maintaining pay parity for certain people.
Yes.
And not others.
That would be an option.
The less well paid, for example.
That's an option that could be considered, yes.
And is that something that politicians need to seriously engage with?
I think they need to seriously engage with all these questions. And these are questions that have been avoided, and they're tough and they're unpopular, but they do need to engage with them. OK, all right. Look, thanks to you all. Stay there, because I want to get your thoughts on what the First and Deputy First Minister said about the budget at the British-Irish Council meeting just a couple of days ago.
We emphasise that while there were some good aspects to the budget, we do feel that it was a missed opportunity. We need to have economic growth in Northern Ireland. We need to have economic growth across the UK. These types of fiscal events are an opportunity to try to get that economic growth to support businesses. You don't get economic growth by taxing those who work more. You don't get economic growth by putting more and more cost onto businesses. So we do feel it was a missed opportunity. We conveyed that today. There were a number of specific issues, of course, we wanted to see, not least that VAT reduction pilot for Northern Ireland, the issues with agricultural relief, the changes that had been proposed, and we want to see that reversed in this budget. So there were a number of key things that didn't happen.
Yeah, and just to add to that, so I said publicly before I came here that I would put directly to the Prime Minister the anger that's out there among many families and households that are really struggling to meet their food bills, that are really struggling with the cost of living crisis. And I feel that this budget was a missed opportunity. And I said that directly to the Prime Minister today. I don't believe the policy choices being made in London reflect the needs of the people that we represent at home. And I wanted to underline that.
So that was the message to Downing Street from Stormont. John Manley, if this year's anything to go by, that is likely to be met with a shrug of the shoulders in all likelihood, and London, isn't it?
Well, yes, I suppose it's a bit rich. Now, there is merit in the argument that they're making over there, but it's a bit rich coming from the First and Deputy First Minister to talk about missed opportunities when our own executive has continually missed opportunities and kicks cans down the road. And it's been clear that Hilary Benn's, response from his speech at the Ulster University in February that it's really get on with public sector transformation. That's what's required. And I don't think there's any more money coming.
Yeah, although that in itself isn't a silver bullet or a magic wand.
No, certainly not, and nor is the multi-year budget a panacea, but at least it maybe sends the right signal to the Treasury that, isn't the Treasury's often treated like a fairy godmother that'll arrive just before midnight with a pot of money, and that doesn't seem to be that's what's going to happen going into the new year.
What do you think the Treasury, in all seriousness, Dan Forsyth, is likely to say in response to that? Because all kinds of issues, inheritance tax reform, for example, Andrew Muir was complaining about the Treasury just not being interested, not seriously engaging. That's one example of many we could point to this morning. It looks like the Treasury's ears are closed to this conversation.
Well, it's been really difficult with this Labour Chancellor. We're still recovering from last year's budget, and we actually haven't recovered. We've got the family farm tax, the increase in employers' national insurance contributions, and then this year, moving forward with a further freeze on the tax thresholds, which is a real-time pay cut, is pushing people into paying tax that hadn't before. The unpredictability of what she's going to do in this role and what the Treasury is going to do, and the very clear messaging coming from the Secretary of State is not positive for us here. It has not been good messaging coming through from this budget, and the hard-working families here in Northern Ireland and the businesses are really facing significant pressures.
Anne, how totemic do you think that response of Andrew Muir is? He was talking at Stormont during the week and he said, I think he was maybe speaking to Matthew, and he said, my frustration has been the lack of proper engagement and frankly empathy, particularly from Treasury on the matter of inheritance tax and the implications here for small farmers.
Yeah, the UK government have their own financial problems, and Northern Ireland is, 3% of the total spend, and so we're really minor in the big scale of things. And I think the Treasury will see the decisions like inheritance tax and the spending review decisions as done and dusted and not to be reopened, and they'll be saying to Northern Ireland, it's up to you to manage within your own budget.
And this is particularly challenging, John, at the moment. And the timing, you might argue, couldn't be worse because we are now, I think, 17 months away from the next scheduled Assembly election.
Well, yes.
Positions tend to harden, not soften.
Well, yes, and even trying to agree a multi-year budget with this dispute going on behind the scenes between Paul Givan and John O'Dowd, and in the current climate, you've had various distractions, various fallouts. It just doesn't augur well.
Yeah. Just a very quick word on that. Things get more difficult, not easier at a time like this.
Yes, things are always difficult, and part of the problem is our politics is so much about standoff and sham fight that people out there just get completely disillusioned. So it's for the they're certainly true. The Treasury are the panto villains, and they are not listening about this place. They don't really care.
Okay.
That's all true. The challenge is take responsibility here and deliver for people. Don't just blame them.
Got to leave it there, folks. Thank you all very much indeed. That's all we've time for. I'll be back with The View at the usual time of 10:40 on Thursday night on BBC One and iPlayer. And look out for a new Red Lions conversation dropping on Wednesday afternoon. You'll find that as ever on BBC Sounds or wherever you get your podcasts. But for now, from all of us, thanks for watching. Bye-bye.